Hello all, I hope you're well in these extraordinary times. I'd like to welcome you today to the Fintech Finance Virtual Arena. In this special arena, we're going to be discussing the Hong Kong fintech landscape, the global fast track program, and what this means for fintechs all around the world. Joining me is none other than King Leung, the head of fintech at InvestHK. So King, thank you so much for joining me today. And for our viewers who don't know you, could you give a bit of background to yourself and your role at InvestHK?
Sure. Well, I've been with InvestHK for just over a year. And prior to joining InvestHK, I've been working in the private sector, from doing the big data to the CRM, to digital marketing, to insurtech and consulting work, a whole host of backgrounds that basically combine technology and various business disciplines. Now, I think that was a pretty useful background, especially given the current role at InvestHK, and that is to essentially attract the major players in fintech around the world, including UK, to basically come and settle in Hong Kong, in which to enrich the fintech ecosystem. Now, and of course, I think having that prior background in private sector, that makes me, in a better position to connect with entrepreneurs, understand what they need, in order to serve them better. Now, so besides attracting overseas fintech companies to Hong Kong, another hat that we wear is to essentially help foster the fintech ecosystem in Hong Kong. And that essentially range from various activities, from understanding the pain points from the ecosystem to talking to the regulators in order to feedback about what the private sector needs, and also talking to various investors and corporates to try to match them with the really exciting and innovative fintechs that we are able to meet from all around the world. So essentially, we are basically involved in connecting the dots across Hong Kong.
That's absolutely amazing. I mean, it sounds like quite the undertaking. And I'm kind of taking a step back then. Can you give our viewers maybe a background to InvestHK? Obviously, you mentioned it's about connecting those dots for fintech. But what are the day-to-day activities of InvestHK and how did it start?
Sure. Now, when InvestHK was first established over 20 years ago, the primary remit was to essentially drive FDI, foreign direct investment, from all around the world. And since then, I think my predecessors have been working tirelessly to establish presence. So now we basically have over 30 cities with our presence around the world. So naturally, with our colleagues from overseas, including the London, the Berlin, the New York, the major hubs around the world, we have the privilege to basically interact with a lot of companies. So at InvestHK, we have basically 9 sector teams, and fintech being one of them. So our colleagues from overseas interact with the entrepreneurs, for example, in the fintech space, in order to understand the expansion needs. If they do want to expand to Asia, whether or not Hong Kong is a place they want to get into as the sort of launching pad to go to the rest of Asia. So after that, those kind of interactions that the sector teams specialists, like the folks on my team, will be involved in order to understand the pain points and also answer questions in order to basically narrow down the scope of these entrepreneurs to help them sort of have a more focused path to enter to the Hong Kong market.
That's absolutely amazing. And kind of going on from what you were talking about in terms of your kind of private business background, and InvestHK obviously being over 20 years old now. When you look at financial services in Hong Kong, do you think the biggest changes have been technological, or do you think there's been a cultural change for the large institutions? Do you think they now see a time for fintech to really flourish in Hong Kong? Or do you think it's just been pushed purely because of the technological availability in Hong Kong?
Well, I think this is a great question, and I'll try to answer that from 2 perspectives. Now, the first perspective is about the availability of various transformative technologies. So naturally, because the Hong Kong governments have been investing an enormous amount of resources to boost the innovation and technology sector. So I think that alone has created a lot of innovation labs and investment by various companies to set up their own startups or incubators and whatnot. So that has been going on for the past 5 to 8 years. So we do have some homegrown technologies. Now, but having said that, Hong Kong is just a city, so we cannot possibly invent everything by ourselves. And of course, with the DNA and the roots for being a trading hub for decades, so we are having this privilege for being the sort of melting pots of I think international players coming to Hong Kong, using Hong Kong to springboard to other parts of Asia, mainland China, ASEAN, and so on. As a result, we are able to attract a lot of innovative technology players from literally around the world. Of course, from Europe, the US, the Singapore, the Australia, and of course, not the least, mainland China. So we do have the luxury of having these cutting-edge technologies, setting up shops in Hong Kong to provide us this rich supply of technologies. So that's from a technology standpoint. Now, but that alone really just provides the foundation. I think to your question, so what really sort of kicks off that whole transformation is really about just I think a lot of, I would say, various things that happen around the same time. So I often want to describe it as almost all the stars are aligned in the past, I would say literally 1-2 years. Of course, the foundation has always been there. But then what really happened was that, for example, the HMA, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the regulator, and also the de facto central bank, they've been taking some bold moves, including giving out 8 virtual banking licenses. So that you may ask, wow, for a small market like Hong Kong, would that really warrant giving out 8 virtual banking licenses in one go? But then I think if we look at it from a different perspective, so if you look at the background of the 8 virtual banks that eventually received the licenses, many of them, actually 6 of them to be exact, came from very strong technology background from mainland China. The Alibaba, the Tencent, the Ping An, the JD.com of the world. So we got some enormous players in terms of the technological powers and also enormous financial strength that coming into Hong Kong in order to really give like a shot in the arm, having like a new kind of energy into the market. So that definitely allowed Hong Kong, particularly the incumbent financial institutions, to take notice. And as a result, that basically spur more innovation. So this is one major push, if you will, spearheaded by HMA. Now, at the same time with COVID, I believe this is a pattern that we see all over the world, which is the acceleration of adoption of digitization. So Hong Kong is no exception. So I think when I talk to a number of leading figures in Hong Kong and some of the business leaders in this space, they basically said that normally it would take, say, 3 years to go through a digitization process at a major bank. So now we basically condense everything into, say, 3 months. So this is another. I'm not joking. This is really from a lot of the leaders in the Hong Kong ecosystem that be repeatedly telling me this. So in a way, I think all these things are happening at the same time. So that's why I said now the stars are finally aligned to make a major push in fintech.
Gosh, it sounds like such an exciting area to be in when it comes to fintech, and kind of following on from that, with that such a unique DNA, with the technological inputs from obviously Shenzhen and mainland China, and coming in with that homegrown talent of Hong Kong. What do you think Hong Kong does in fintech better than anywhere else in the world, and how do you think you're going to build on that going forward?
Well, I guess we have to go back to the DNA or the roots of the folks in Hong Kong. So obviously, Hong Kong being a global financial center is not an accident. Basically, there have been sort of decades and like generations of practitioners in the financial services that basically have one thing in common, and that is this pragmatic mindset. So in many ways, when you look at, I think the folks in Hong Kong, if you ask them, well, do you really, so how much energy do you put into sort of like innovation or inventing something from scratch? And they will tell you, well, if there's something already in place that we can build on, so why should we spend the time to reinvent a wheel? I think you talk to different business leaders in Hong Kong, you'll probably hear similar responses. Now, as a result, of course, I think we do have the different pockets of innovation in Hong Kong. But even more importantly, because we are really in this sort of melting pot situation, so we got a lot of technologies already in place. We just basically have to sort of augment them to serve the various purposes. Now, as a result, so what Hong Kong is good at is that we do have a lot of, say cross-border transactions taking place. Be it the renminbi settlement or payment, remittances, capital markets. So in a way, Hong Kong, even though we only have a population of 7.5 million people, but then if you are looking at merely the volume of liquidity or transactions going in and out of Hong Kong, I mean, it's just an astounding number, regardless of how you look at it. And as a result, we are able to do well in areas where we're able to apply different technologies or different fintechs based on the various use cases, be it payments or remittances, trade finance, capital markets, and so on. So this is what Hong Kong is really good at, is being pragmatic and being able to leverage on our position as I would say, a hub.
Brilliant. And speaking of that pragmatism and that hub, whenever I think of finance in Hong Kong, I think of the large financial, the very traditional institutions as well. And do you think they're starting to be receptive to the fintech revolution going on? Obviously now there are 8 virtual banks as well. What does that ecosystem look like for the traditional banks?
Well, I guess if you look at the different sectors, the banking, the asset management, the insurance, and so on, I have to say that the banking sector has made the most progress so far. Now, a part of it is that obviously the banks are, relatively speaking, more resourceful. Again, these guys are, have lots of smart people. They have the innovation labs, so they're fully aware of what's happening in the rest of the world. Some of the innovations, say in UK, right? I mean, the whole sort of open banking initiative. I mean, folks in Hong Kong are very well aware about what's happening around the world. Now, behind the awareness, you really have to have some impetus to get things moving. Now, and with that, I have to give a lot of credit to our colleagues at HMA, basically FFO, the Fintech Facilitation Office, and also some of the supervision teams at HMA have been working really tirelessly over the past 5 years in trying to push for some changes and adoption. So all this hard work are not just like 1 or 2 events that make this happen. It's just really like continuous effort in making this happen. Now, I think to sort of put this whole thing in perspective, there was this research being published by the HMA, the research arm of HMA, I think back in May this year. And within that study, they basically announced this number, which I think is very amazing. And that is the percentage of banks that already adopted or in the process of adopting fintech. And that number was 86%. So 86% of the banks surveyed by HMA actually already adopted fintech in different shapes or forms. Yeah, so I think that is a pretty good number that speaks for itself. And I think I have to give a lot of credit to our colleagues at HMA. So of course, with the banking sector leading the way, the insurance sector, the wealth management sector are also following suits.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, that is an absolute incredible number. And let's let's move away from Hong Kong and start talking about what you've been working on really at the at Invest Hong Kong. And as a British news outlet, I've been aware of the UK Hong Kong Fintech Bridge. I thought it was a brilliant idea. So I've got to ask, what started that concept and what has it ultimately done for both parties?
Right. Now, I think at the end of the day, I mean, the Hong Kong market and the UK market have been so closely linked for decades, for I think a lot of historical legacy reasons. So that's why I think if you talk to a lot of the business leaders in Hong Kong, there's always soft spots about UK where we just feel that there's a close bonding. As a result, we meaning I think the governments, the regulators, we always I would say place a close attention to all the things happening in UK. Now, of course, I think open banking and a lot of the, I would say, new regulatory changes in UK are something that are really very inspirational. So as a result, I think that even back in 2017, 2018, that the leaders in governments, the financial services Treasury Bureau, at the sub-minister level, as well as the regulators. So they've been working very closely with UK governments. Now, so for Invest Hong Kong, we are also involved in that process. So our counterparty, the UK DIT, we're also very heavily involved. As a result, the MOU were signed. So I think in essence, what happened was there was this agreement that I think while we respect each other, we want to really have something more concrete happening to really foster more interactions. As a result, I think one of the major initiatives is to have this exchange program. So essentially, I think from the UK side, there will be like a handful of really innovative fintech companies from UK that were ready to expand to Asia. So they were helped by like folks from UK DIT to help them land in Hong Kong. Of course, from the Hong Kong side, we also gave the commitments to provide various resources to connect these UK fintechs to the regulators, business leaders, maybe the banks, various institutions as potential clients, and also connecting them with the accelerators like the Cyberport Science Park, which is the equivalent of like level 39. So basically, whatever resources that were required by these hand-picked UK fintechs, we wanted to make them successful in Hong Kong. So when they were successful in Hong Kong, I mean, the rationale is that they will be expanding, hiring people, and subsequently passing on the great knowledge and experience they had from UK to also benefit and enrich the Hong Kong ecosystem. Now, likewise, we also handpicked some fintech companies from Hong Kong, sent them over to UK. They were also very nicely taken care of by folks in UK. So this is really a great partnership that have some very concrete activities that really benefited both ecosystems.
So the Hong Kong UK Fintech Bridge was back in 2017. The purpose of this interview now is really to understand what you've been working on since, and that's the Global Fast Track program. So King, could you tell me a bit more about that?
Sure. Well, the Global Fast Track program is a major initiative for us, not only in Hong Kong, but the entire Hong Kong government's body that are involved in the fostering of fintech. Now, basically, we've been looking at the right way of doing it this year, because obviously the year 2020 is unprecedented. The whole world is under a lot of, I would say, financial and economic pressure. So we're like, okay, if we were to do something that can really sort of benefit the fintechs, what would that be? So drawing on the DNA and the roots of being pragmatic, so we thought, well, perhaps we should really go back to basics. So there are really, I would say, three components that are really the hallmarks or the major characteristics of the Fast Track program this year. The first, of course, I think as a government, we want to demonstrate to the private sector that we want to show the commitments, that we want the sector to be successful. So that's why we've been putting together an enormous amount of government funding and resources in subsidizing various initiatives. And to put in perspective, we are looking at, as a whole, so all the funding that would be eligible for the fintech sector amounts to US dollar 49 billion US dollar.
Wow.
So it's an enormous amount of resources put forward. Now, on an individual fintech perspective, let's assume that a fintech would apply to all the various government schemes available. And if they do get approval for all of them, they will be able to receive up to 2.6 million US dollar of various funding subsidies. So this is, I would say, the first step for us to demonstrate that we are behind the sector, we want to do our parts. But of course, that's not enough, because obviously for any commercial sector, startups, really, I think what they really need is the ability to land contracts, with clients. Because once they have the contracts that demonstrate that they got attraction, and subsequently they can raise money with private VCs and so on. So that is just so important. So we feel that the second thing we want to do is to use our resources and also the influencing power of the governments to really draw and bring together all the private sector enterprises at the sort of client side. So the banks, the insurance companies, asset managers, we basically want to sort of bring them together to, in a way, rally the community to offer the supports, in buying services from the fintechs. So of course, the governments would offer some subsidy in a way to partly pay for those, POC, proof of concept projects and pilots, in a way to incentivizing the corporations to adopt fintechs. Okay, so this is the second bit, is a business matching and also a bit of support from governments. Now, the third bit of it is that we also reach out to all the private investors at different varying stages, the seed investor, the Series A, Series B, also later stages investors, and then say, hey, we really need your help. And by the way, as governments, we are literally going all over the world, 6 regions around the world, to cover basically all the major markets you can think of in order to do basically deal sourcing. And then we are able to basically channel the deals to the investors, the private investors, and say, look, we are doing this for free because we want to make sure that we got enough of the best deals around the world in the fintech space. We are literally just hand feeding, right, to the investors. And then they say, hey, this is great. I mean, you save me some efforts and time. Of course, we are in. So now we are able to bring in, at the moment, a dozen of fintech VCs. Of course, I think the list will continue to expand because we are able to attract more and more private investors over the next 2-3 months. So we are envisioning a pretty nice cluster of private investors standing ready to basically talk to all the fast track applicants. And then if the due diligence, everything go well, they're able to write the checks. So this is the third way we're able to connect the private investors with the fintechs from all around the world, including the local fintechs and folks from overseas coming to Hong Kong to set up.
That's absolutely amazing. And I love that kind of 3-pronged approach, government, investment, business. And I think that's just going to create such a brilliant and dynamic ecosystem. And I'd like to explore further that second prong. What I like about this program is it's not just a government initiative. While that's absolutely amazing to hear that the government is doing this for free and kind of showing confidence that you just want to innovate and grow, the fact that you're then ultimately leaving it to the business side of things shows that there's room for exponential growth. So, I mean, what do you think that second prong of being very business driven is going to do for both the fintechs and the institutions that you're connecting with that are participating in this program?
Well, I think this is another great question. So obviously, again, Hong Kong being a global financial center just took lots of efforts by so many people in the sector to get us to where we are today. But then, as a lot of the leaders have been telling me all along, we don't do fintech well and embrace it, and also making the major players in the sector adopting the fintechs, then I think that sort of global financial center position will not be there for us in the next 5-10 years. So that's why this is something that we want to make sure that we instill that kind of sense of urgency. So obviously, I think the folks in Hong Kong, the major business leaders, they are fully aware of that. But of course, I think a lot of the banks, put aside the major players like the HSBC, the Standard Chartered of the world, they're resourceful, they got the sort of tentacles, literally around the world. So I think they would be able to reach out to different corners of the world to find the best and brightest technology and business models. But then there are also the other players that may not have that kind of sort of global reach. But now that we're able to provide those supplies of the latest and greatest, so really, I think they do appreciate that. And as a result, they do feel that, so now they are able to access, so many different business models and technologies. And also, I think interestingly, I think the ecosystem in Hong Kong is quite complementary as opposed to in other Western markets in which the fintechs are more disruptive by nature. So the complementary nature of the fintechs that we are able to bring in are actually making the financial institutions quite comfortable to work with them in order to, in a way, transform themselves. So as a result, I think the corporate side they are really sort of taking advantage of all these resources to help transform themselves. Now, of course, from the supply standpoint, the fintechs. So with the adoption by different banks and insurance companies, they also benefit because by having the adoption by tech boys, so now they're able to show all these contracts, to the potential investors, to show traction and subsequently able to raise even more money in following rounds. So in a way, this is really like a win-win situation for both the incumbents and also the emerging fintechs, just because of the complementary, collaborative nature.
Excellent. And I want to ask you, from my research, speaking of that complementary nature, it doesn't seem that all the institutions that you're hoping to connect with the fintechs, they're not strictly all financial, are they? You actually am I correct in saying you've pulled in institutions from, for instance, the service sector?
Correct. Well, I think this is another great question. Now, because obviously, the financial services sector is really the engine, right? Like the oil of the economy. So that's why a lot of times we look at the service sector, so like the Chow Tai Fook, which is a great corporate champion for us in the fast track program. So first of all, the Chow Tai Fook, as an example, they are selling gold, they're selling jewelry, but then they happen to be one of the largest in the world. And as a result, they have the financial means and great leadership, great foresight that they know that they have to transform their businesses as well. So obviously today, I think the mindset is really about the user journey, the customer experience. So how can we as a business in Chow Tai Fook in order to I would say elevate the user experience to the next level? So of course, I think that even selling gold and jewelry, they are very active in e-commerce. So e-commerce, of course, you have to get into payments or different perhaps installment schemes and whatnot. So I think there's just really a lot of room for crossover with financial services. So that's why I think for the non-financial services companies, business leaders like Chow Tai Fook, they would like to be closer with the fintech ecosystem. And by collaborating with fintech companies or even financial institutions, to try to have different crossover in order to launch new services that can really help them to leapfrog the competition. So, and we are seeing that across the sector in other non-financial services sector as well.
That's absolutely amazing. Well, King, thank you so much for your time. I believe that's actually all we've got time for. But I want to ask and give you a chance to let our viewers know where's the best way for them to find out more and ultimately get the true lowdown on what you guys are doing.
Well, first of all, at Invest Hong Kong, we are really the kind of the super project manager, if you will. Essentially, when you look at all the various stakeholders, from the government, the ministers, to the regulators, HMA, the SFC, the insurance authority, to the regulator, to the accelerators, incubators, corporates, fintechs, and so on. So we are really connecting to everybody. So we are quite familiar with what are the various action, so to speak. So that's why I think in terms of accessing more information, a good place to start is to contact us at the FinTech units at Invest Hong Kong, or you can go to our FintechHK LinkedIn page, where we do post all the latest information, the webinars, the various major events, and so on. So just come talk to us. We're happy to connect you with the other major stakeholders in Hong Kong.
Amazing. Well, guys, I wish you the best of luck. And King, thank you so much for your time. And to all our viewers, thank you so much for watching. You can, of course, catch the rest of the Virtual Arena series over at www.fintechf.com and, of course, LinkedIn. So to all our viewers, thank you and goodbye.